All right, good evening. I will now call the August 22nd, 2023 meeting of the Ben Lapine School Board of Directors to order. I'd like to introduce our participants this evening. To my immediate left, Director Keena Chadwick, Director Cameron Fisher, Director Shirley Olson, and joining us remotely is Director Carrie McPherson Douglas. To my immediate right is Dr. Stephen Cook, Dr. Laura Nordquist, and Board Chair Janet Bojanowski. And Board Chair, yeah, I like that. Board Clerk Janet Bojanowski, Superintendent, Deputy Superintendent, Board Chair. Okay, sorry, it's summertime. And I am Melissa Barnes-Delaki, I'm the chair of the board. We are joined by Erin Trimble and Hannah Westfall tonight for ASL interpretation, and then our Spanish interpretation is being provided on the BLS School Board YouTube page. Thank you. If you will join me now in standing, removing your hats, and saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We'll now go to the review of the agenda. Superintendent Cook, are there any changes to the agenda?
There are no changes to the agenda.
Great. Fellow board members, are there any requests for changes? Hearing no requests for changes, our agenda will proceed as noticed. And a note for our stakeholders, we do not take public comment during our work sessions. However, we always do during our regular sessions, which are held the second Tuesday of each month. We'll now move into our work session. I am really excited about tonight and an opportunity to dive into the work of the board. Something I will say is that last week, we had someone from Covey and Associates come and speak during our two-day kickoff with all of our leaders from across the district and really talk about what it means to lead a district through trust and inspiration and how to be a trust and inspiring leader. And I think that that's a really exciting opportunity for us to think about as a board. How do we trust and inspire in our work as we lead and supervise our superintendent for him as he's leading and overseeing the work of his cabinet, and then the cabinet across all of their different departments, those departments across all of our schools, those schools across all of our classrooms, and those classrooms, most importantly, with all of our children, all of our youth. And so I'm looking forward to this year of building our abilities together to trust and inspire. With that said, today what we'll be doing is first we're going to look at the board self-assessment. And we're just going to have a little bit of time to refresh. Everybody read it ahead of time, but we'll have a little bit of time to refresh. And then we're going to go through and evaluate where we are on that self-assessment. There are a million self-assessment tools I looked at. Some have 7, some have 8. This one has 12 qualities. This one is from the Oregon School Board Association. And so even though it has 12, and I feel like it's a little long, and I asked Carrie about this as well because she does work in this area, even though it's long, it's comprehensive, and it is the one that's aligned to our state organization, and so I stuck with that. But we'll go through and we'll think about where are our strengths, where can we work on improving this year. We're then going to hand it over to Superintendent Cook, who's going to share with us, along with, I think, Executive Director Kenzie Martin, some policies around operating agreements. We are halfway through this process of cleaning up the policy that is for superintendent evaluation, which we looked at last time, and then adopting a policy that'll be our operating agreement. So they're going to introduce us to what an operating agreement looks like, because we really haven't had a concise one as a district. And then we're going to be looking at the strategic initiatives. As we know with Superintendent Cook, what we have done the last 2 years is really align our system. So we've aligned our goals to our measures, to the strategic initiatives, not just of the district, but that every building is working on, to his evaluation. And we have asked him, just like buildings are asked to have goals in each area. And as Doug Reeves says, who we've been working with the last few years, says a strategic plan should be on 1 to 2 pages. We've asked that he give us 1 to 2 things that he's doing, that his team is doing in each of our goal areas this year, so they'll be sharing that. And then that gets tied to his superintendent evaluation. So what he shares tonight will be what we evaluate against, as well as the ELs. Do you want to add
Just
anything?
add one thing. We're still in negotiation on some of the strategic initiatives for Goal 4. We have some real explicit things that we feel like we're dialed in on for the first 3 goals. We'll talk about that more. But I do want to qualify that of the 4 sub-goal, or excuse me, of the Goal 4 has 9 sub-goals. And those are very operational in nature. And I'm going to talk a lot about those. Well, I'm going to talk a lot about a lot of things. But when we get to those sub-goals, part of what we're agreeing to on this year are what are the things that we want to say are what are tools of monitoring for those sub-goals. And we're going to come back probably in a month or so with a better, more concise list for that 4th goal on what those strategic initiatives are, specific as it relates to those things that we feel like are important to monitor in those sub-goals. So I just want to clarify that before we get too far in.
Great, thank you. So the first thing I'll ask is that you pull up the 12 standards from OSBA on board work. These are, when we think about these standards, these are the things that highly effective boards do. And these actions, I just spent an entire semester, I just got my grade, yay. I just spent an entire semester studying research methods. I could have taken the class from Dr. Fisher, but I did it at University of Oregon, not OSU Cascades. Sorry, Ducks, Beavers. But you would probably concur. There's some research, there's not super strong research. And so these tend to be the correlational rather than causal behaviors of boards that impact student achievement and outcomes in districts. And so what I'd ask us to do is I'm going to have us take 5 minutes to just review those 12. And I want you to give us a rating on 1 to 4, where you would rate each of those. And the rating scale that I use is the same as we use in our superintendent, which is an asset-based or growth mindset scale. So it's just beginning, approaching, meeting, or exceeding. So 1 to 4, just approaching, or just beginning, which means we haven't really started in that area, approaching, meeting, exceeding. And you're going to give a 1 to 4 for each of the 12 areas, okay? All right, thank you. We have one more minute, and then I'll do a time check to see if we need more. All right, that's 5 minutes. Can I see on hand if you need any more? 0, 1, 2, 0. Okay. Great. So then what I'm going to ask, you can have an opportunity to show courage and be brave, but I'm just going to ask for a volunteer to start and say, you know, here's where I think we are for standard 1. And then we're going to go through and discuss standard 1 and decide what we think. And then we're going to move on to standard 2, and someone's going to introduce what they think we are, and we can have a conversation and reach consensus. And I'm going to take notes along the way. And if you have evidence for why we are, that would be great too. So we're going to start with standard 1, which is vision-directed planning. Is there a volunteer? I'll volunteer. Watch this. So I actually, I gave us a meets on this. It doesn't mean that we don't have areas for growth, but I do believe that we have been able to clearly articulate what the vision and the strategic goals are of this district. I think that we took the feedback that came out of the equity and excellence review process that was done and used that to drive forward. At the same time, I think we're just beginning to align our budget to really make that alignment of our budget to the vision and the strategic goals and the strategic initiatives transparent. So I think that's an area of growth for us. And I also think that there's an area of growth around really doing the work with the community.
You took the words right out of my mouth.
Anything else, Carrie?
No, not on that one. That was really well said.
As I reviewed these, I tried to think of examples. And if I could think of an example, then I put a check mark by the sub-statements. So I totally agree with you. I think we do have a little more work to do in both of those areas. And I specifically noted the word collaborate with the community. So we've got good intentions. I'm not sure that we're as far along on that one as we want to be.
Yes.
One thing I'd like to add, I'm not sure is fair because it's not exactly captured in the vision the way that we approach it, that this board has put significant attention to that I think is the right attention. And that is that the idea of high expectations for excellence in student learning actually starts with experiencing a sense of belonging in their schools. And so creating a dynamic that, like what I would ask for is either an edited bullet in this one for visioning is that belonging comes first. that we want kids to experience that belonging, because then they're set up for success to experience a higher expectation for learning and deeper learning opportunities in our schools. And if that were added to this, I would say I classified, and by the way, when I rated you all, I rated myself in that as well. So I rated the 8 of us as a system. I put us at a 3, but I think that's an area that we actually are doing a really nice job of articulating it's an expectation. We're not where we need to be yet, most certainly. That's an implementation conversation, but creating that vision at least is well articulated and established.
So Dr. Cook, that would be that bullet number 4 is where it's not just improving student learning, but that improving student learning based on a sense of belonging.
I would say, yes, for me, it was bullet 4 and bullet 7, the last one. Those two were the ones that I would like to have either a connection between the two or one more bullet.
Great. All right, let's move to standard 2. Do I have a volunteer? I do, we do, you do. Thank you.
So for community engagement, I put a 2 here. And I really like, Shirley, your model of approaching this. And I think I put a 2 because I think about, just as a parent in the district, like receiving information, for me personally, like it's sufficient. And I would love to hear from other families and caregivers in the district on how well we're reaching out to them. I did notice actually in the recent letter from my school that they alternated English and Spanish paragraphs versus all of English at the beginning, all of Spanish at the end. That caught my eye right away, and I really appreciated that. So yeah, I would just like us, in the same effort of belonging, to make sure that we're reaching out to as many folks as we can.
Thank you. Would anyone like to add to that? I will say I wrote, Cameron, go ahead.
I was just going to mention, just to preface this, is that this is only my 3rd meeting, so, but from what I know and what I've viewed as a parent prior to being on the board, I gave a 3 with regard to community engagement. Sorry. I gave a 3, and connecting a little bit with what Kina was mentioning, but also, and I highlighted kind of yellow as caution and green as great, and that last bullet, 1, 2, 3, 4, the board advocates for public policy. I feel I've seen a lot of engagement, and again, 3rd meeting, I don't know what's, has gone in the past, but I feel like that's a really big positive right now.
Yeah, thanks for calling that out. I feel like our board has a really strong relationship with all of our different elected officials, and that we do advocate quite a bit on public policy. I did rate us as a 2, similar to Director Chadwick, and that was really about that soliciting input and involvement from all segments. And I just really feel like, I think our intention is there, but I feel like we can continue to push ourselves there. And the other one, I feel like we do it, but I always want to do more of it, is celebrating the contributions of school and community members, because I think anytime you have high expectations, it behooves you, and if you have those, you take on the responsibility, if you will, of then recognizing when it's happening, and celebrating it. And so those are my 2, the input and the celebration.
I would just add briefly, I mostly agree. I gave us a 3. I think I was in between a 2 and a 3. I think I've mentioned this to you before, Melissa. I think on the first bullet, that sometimes our receiving of input and involvement from the community is a little reactive, and that we hear from community members at public comment, when when there's something bad going on, sometimes something good. And then we all, go out and represent the community in the places where we all naturally end up, but we don't proactively ensure that the board is hearing directly from a cross section of the community kind of on a regular basis, and making sure that we're hearing from a diverse group and not just those that show up at public sessions. So whether that was a board survey to the public occasionally or board focus groups, where again, we work really hard, like the district has done when they've done focus groups, to ensure that the groups are diverse and are representative, and aren't just the folks that show up and typically in times of crisis, so that we're hearing regularly from a cross section about a broad range of issues. And then I would just say on bullet 5, I agree. I think we have generally strong relationships across our government offices. I don't know that we necessarily collaborate intentionally enough. And I think there's some real, like, as our city grows, there's some really big needs and projects across the community that I would love to see our board and city council and county commissioners and parks potentially work even more formally on. And we used to have an annual meeting with at least parks and sometimes city council, and we've kind of stopped doing those. So I think we can continue to improve there.
Thank you for that, Carrie. I think the one that struck me was bullet 2, and just almost read it like a standalone. And I wondered, are we actively balancing those 4 kind of categorical areas? And are we, I still feel like we've got Student Voice Council firing up, but are we hearing from our students, and are we hearing from our staff, and are we hearing from parents in the broader community in a way that gives us what we would say is a balanced view of all of what we're trying to take on? And I just don't know if we've got, and I'm not trying to assume that it has to be 25% of our input comes from each of those groups, but can we speak specifically to each of those groups as a point of input?
I also was thinking about how relationships were declining in the youth truth data. And when I think of, relationships is a piece of that engagement model, right? And so my mind jumps from, okay, if this is what we're seeing in the schools from the people who responded, there's also people who didn't respond, and how is that impacting the broader community, right? So I think that was also kind of part of why I gave that a 2, and I also think it's critical, especially for belonging. So yeah.
Great, thank you. From what I've heard, I've heard 2s and 3s, but I think I hear us leaning more towards a 2, if that's okay.
I agree.
Yeah, okay. All right, let's go to effective leadership. Is there any brave person who would like to start us off? There is, so we're each going to have to go at least twice.
Okay. Most of these things are in place, I believe, strongly. The 2 that I question, and we've already kind of mentioned it, but the board solicits input from multiple sources to make informed decisions. We're not quite there yet, although what we do is we do honor what each of us individually has heard, seen, experienced and bring it back to the board, but not in a direct fashion. It's a third person. And the other one is, I do think we could do a little more with our state legislatures. We're a big enough district that we make a difference. And I think we could, again, Carrie, I liked your words, a little more proactive in that way. So I would say a 3.
Yeah, I was stuck a little bit on this one, and I went between 2 and 3. The input one, I think, is just going to catch us every time.
Yeah.
The other one that I had was empowering leadership style. And then I'm like, well, I think we empower our one employee, but do we consistently model an empowering leadership style? So that was the other one that I was just thinking a little bit about, especially vis-a-vis the trust and inspiring piece that we just did in the leadership kickoff.
And by the way, I have an extra book for each of you if you would like a copy of that.
Thank you. I was going to also add, I agree with everything that's been said. Again, third meeting. I would also add, I guess I may be seeking more information or curiosity about the promote change through dialogue and collaboration. How that might evolve more.
Director Chadwick? What would you, do you think we're just, are we approaching, are we meeting with growth areas, approaching?
I'd say we're meeting with growth.
Areas?
Yeah, I think, I think what comes to mind for me is that February 14th meeting, and I guess prior to that, and I think it puts, it's a testament to, I think, to how much more work we need to do and how much more empowering we need to make teachers feel. So that's why that when you mentioned that bullet board members model and empowering leadership style, that meeting just popped into my head and all the, yeah.
What do you guys think? I can leave it at a 2.5. Okay, it's a 2.5.
That's kind of like a C+.
You know.
That's a C+.
Okay, I'll take data, because I love data. So standard 5 is using data for continuous improvement and accountability. Oh, 4. Oh, I'm sorry, 4. Never mind, I'm not taking it. Accountability. Sorry, accountability. Well, funny you should ask. When I was looking at these, I said, oh, we don't evaluate ourselves. Maybe we should do that during our board retreat. And so I think that's definitely a growth area for us, is to step back. We've spent a lot of time developing our systems to evaluate our superintendent, measure the work of our district, but we need to measure ourselves. And so I had us kind of in that 2 to 3, because I feel like we've done a lot of it. I think we're a 3 in everything except ourselves, and we're a 2 because we are now doing it. But yeah, I think we're a 2 for ourselves.
I really liked the bullet about establishing performance goals for itself. We could establish some goals as a board. We'll meet, just as a random example, since we're filling out, you know, which schools we're going to visit the first few days of school. You know, I'm going to visit X number of schools. During the year, high times are certain things. I'll make an attempt to attend extra curricular things to support kids, importantly in their activities, you know, along with their academic things. So we could do that. And again, we can't do them all at once. But I do think a goal for this school year would be a really nice thing for us to agree on.
Yeah, I think Shirley, I really noted that one as well, both that we don't do it and that it would be great too. I wanted to just give our board kudos and for our current president on the conducting an effective superintendent evaluation. That is just something done so poorly in so many districts, and our board has been really diligent about doing that and doing it well. I think for me, I still struggle with the budget, aligning resources based on student learning priorities. I feel like we've made a lot of gains, and there's still a lot about the budget that is difficult to have real transparency into how specific programs or initiatives, like what their data is and how much money they're spending, and whether that's the best possible use of money to focus on student learning priorities. So I'd love to see us continuing to focus there. But overall, I felt like in my experience, we were higher than average on this standard, and would love to see us do more reflection and self-evaluation and establishing goals. Oh, and also the other one was disaggregated student results and growth measured against expectations set by district strategic goals. It's been quite a few years since we've had clear, we've set how we're going to measure data and we've looked at data, but we haven't established what we're working towards, in large part because of the pandemic, but that really needs to happen.
On that note, would you like to introduce Standard 5 on data? It's kind of a perfect segue.
I would love to. Yeah, so I gave us, this is 5. I gave us a 2.5. I think that I really appreciate the effort that has gone into providing data that refers back to each of our ELs and back to each of our goals. Like, I think we've done a really good job of aligning how we spend board time and reports to make sure that we're getting data on the goals and priorities that we've established. I think, again, that we don't always get data disaggregated to the level I would like to see. We still look at a lot of averages and district-wide data, and I would love more data around specific programs, specific schools, and there's not always a clear through line between, like, 1 year we're told that there's a goal and we need to work on something, and then sometimes it's a whole year until we return back to that goal and there are new priorities. And so sometimes it feels like it's a long time between, I'm looking at the word continuous improvement and accountability and just thinking about, like, how are our cycles of data review quick enough that we can really see and track improvement and change over time. And yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you.
I'd like to tag on what Carrie was just saying. I think one of I agree with her point on so many levels. Part of what our team is spending time now diving into is as a follow-up to the work that we started last year with the training from the Center for Educational Leadership, is understanding the purpose and rationale for when satellite data or that high-level aggregate data talks about how the system is performing and what its true value is, and about discerning whether or not we're having the impact we desire, and then getting equally in-depth and getting almost on ground level what we've kind of, you maybe have heard us reference it several times in this room as street data, which is what are kids experiencing in real time. And for us, the street data is the kind of data where perhaps we're doing some qualitative analysis. We're looking at what kids are telling us, and we're using that data to make real-time decisions on how leadership is shifting and moving in their respective buildings. And I'm wondering if there's a value as we start to think about what we're monitoring to say, this is data that's satellite level. It's not going to give us some of the answers that we're interested in, especially when we talk about goal 3. But some of these other data points at a lower level, ground level, where kids are experiencing what they're experiencing in their schools and their classrooms, might be something that we can get more iterative on and have more kind of cyclical, inquiry-based kind of how's that going. It seems to me that there's a real golden opportunity here for us to talk further about that.
I agree, Steve, and I do value the data that we have been getting these last couple of years. It's been extensive. I agree that it's not always deep enough, but on the other hand, the way I feel about data is, what questions are you trying to answer? So we have to ask the questions and then have the staff gather the data that will help us answer that question. So as opposed to waiting to see what they bring us, if that makes sense. So we need to get better at asking specifically, what is it we want to know? By the way, I gave us a 4 on that. There's always room for improvement, but from my experience, we've done quite a job on requesting data and receiving it.
I would say, yeah, I gave us a 3 on data, but I would say that if you look at the measures that we have put in place, I'd challenge you to find another district that has as robust a set of measures that range from experiences to outcomes across different levels, and are using a variety of different indicators. I just think that the team, that the cabinet really came back with powerful measures for each of our goals. All right, cultural responsiveness. Did I see you queuing up there, Director Chadwick? Oh, I hear Director McPherson Douglas.
No, I just want to confirm, and I apologize if I missed something, but you're saying that we have set the goal that we're working towards for each of those measures and identified whether it's growth or performance and whether it's improvement or a set number.
We have not set the benchmark numbers yet, but we have identified the measures, whether they are growth or number, that we have a combination of indicators that are growth versus achievement level. And I think that we have a combination of measures that are quantitative and qualitative. We include focus groups. So yeah, I think that our list of measures that the cabinet drafted in alignment to our goals is very strong. But we do not have benchmark 5-year goals yet.
Well, okay, yeah, we don't have any benchmark goals even for 1 year.
Carrie, I know that you've requested that before. We've had a conversation about it, but maybe we need to put that into a little more of a priority. And again, figure out the question, what is it we really want to ask?
Yeah, and then just the other nuance there is, I know we have some measures that measure student growth versus student performance. I'm talking about whether we're holding the superintendent accountable for just improvement versus trying to hit a performance benchmark.
We do not. Portland Public Schools is the only district I know of right now where that's written into the superintendent contract.
Yeah, I'm not saying it has to be in the superintendent contract. I'm saying that I expect each of our performance goals to have either a growth, like we expect to see 2% improvement year over year, or we expect to reach, this number or percentage of students performing at this level for each goal.
Yeah.
And there's reasons why improvement is good. There's reasons why benchmarks are good. We still have not had that discussion nor established those. And it's really important to me that we do that this year.
Yep. And I would say, just to check for understanding here, but when we set those, they're one and the same for the district and the superintendent, in my understanding.
Yeah, it's just whether it's like written into his contract. We treat them that way, but I don't think we've, semantics. I hear you.
Great. All right. Now we're going to cultural responsiveness. So I think this is a really tough one because we're measuring how well we're doing in our work to promote this, not necessarily where the district is yet in this. And I think those are two different things. For me, I feel that this board values cultural responsiveness and cultural relevancy, that this board articulates consistently that importance. I believe that we have, over the last 5 years, had a board that reflects diversity in our student body, that's found in our student body. And I believe that with the support of Kinsey, we have actually reviewed a substantial number of policies to ensure that they are culturally responsive. I think there's growth in this area, but in terms of what we've been doing as a board around cultural responsiveness, I gave us a meeting.
I agree. The only one that I particularly questioned was to ensure that district employees are representative of the values and culture. And we know we're working on that, and we have made some significant strides in our recent hires, but there's still a long ways to go.
I agree. I think, and I'm glad you addressed that clarity, that in addition to district employees representative, I also would suggest or hope for further pressing with regard to bullet 3, the board's process to review policies of cultural responsiveness and bias. I think there's a lot more, whether it's facilitation or pushing or encouragement on the part of the district that can be done.
Yeah, so I gave us, I gave us a 2, and, I think about what you had just shared with us, right? And if I was a student in a class and like, I'm making strides and I've, now I have a C instead of a D, but I'm working really hard. Well, if I evaluate myself, I'm still have a C kind of thing. And so I think we are making strides. And I think about, just thinking about, how we're, I guess I have issues with the responsiveness one. Like, I think we've mentioned it on a couple of these standards, to be more proactive, and maybe that can be a thread that kind of runs through all of these. But I agree. I think we're doing a great job and we can do better. And I mean, having those cultural nights this year, that was awesome. And a lot of people came out to those. So, yeah, I think we're approaching, and yeah, we're getting there.
I'm going to start moving us along on a quicker clip. And I'm going to go into culture and climate. I gave us a 3. A little bit similar, so give me some pushback. But I think that we came in and said that we want a stronger experience for our students. We put in the Youth Truth survey. I mean, we didn't select Youth Truth, but we said we want a survey where we can disaggregate data and look at students and their experiences in our schools and measure what the culture feels like for them. And we've got a behavior task force going right now because we don't have the culture and climate that we want in our schools. So I'll stop there and just say there's evidence going both ways.
I just want to note that this one significantly says the board, the board, the board, the board. And as I look through those bullets, I think I can say yes to all of those for the board. Maybe not to the degree that we want system-wide, but for the board, I think it's okay to give ourselves a little pat on the back for the way we work together. I'm not sure this is the right place. Maybe this and systems thinking, but I did give it a 4.
Okay, if there's no further comment, we'll move to Standard 8, Learning Organization.
I gave us I put down a 3.5 here for learning organization. I think, personally, I have not been in this role a long time, and I know that I am totally surrounded by people who know their subjects, people who, they're just the depth and breadth of knowledge within just even the folks, everyone who works in this building, and beyond. So, and I've just been, so many people, it's almost like everyone when I first came here, I was like, I don't feel like I'm in Bend when I'm in this building, because it feels so much more welcoming and so much more, I don't know, just like a positive experience. Yeah, so I give us a 3.5.
Jose, I gave us a 3. I think that we've really, I actually think we have a lot of dialogue and collaboration in our board meetings. And I think that we constantly are learning from our team, which is the district, about research-based strategies. And I feel like the reports that we receive are specifically designed to help us deeply understand what the team is doing and why they're doing it. And so I feel like we are always learning, and that learning isn't, in a PD session, it's in this boardroom learning from everyone who comes to share with us. How about systems thinking? I'll lead. Unless someone else, I see Cameron maybe? No? Yeah,
I was just going to, the one that I was immediately drawn to on this, just having very briefly been on the board, but also observing the board over the last few years, I think the board is extremely solution-oriented. And that's immediately where my eyes went, that this board focuses on problem-solving and focuses on keeping the student at the forefront at all times. That's just one observation.
I rated us low on this one, but it's because it's such a tall order for a part-time board to have the depth and breadth of insight into all of the systems to be able to do this well. So I don't know, I feel like this is just really aspirational. And I struggled. I think we try our very best, and the district tries to give us as much information as they can in the time we have. But when we have, 5 to 15 minutes to hear about a topic, I don't know that that depth is possible to like ensure that we're not shifting problems to another part of the system or, yeah, I don't know. I think it's just really hard, but I think we do as good of a job as we can, given the actual realities of being a board that meets twice a month for a few hours.
I took this from a little different lens, and that is whether or not the board is creating the conditions to meet those expectations. And I honestly believe that this is the board's strongest attribute. I feel like if there is one that is a 4, it's this one. I do agree with Carrie. There's, a board, if we had my way, we would have 4.5-hour board meetings twice a month, because I want the opportunity to give you all that information that we can share. It's not practical, but I've worked with a lot of different boards, and this board has consistently, during the time I've been here, been a board that does a very nice job of having a systems viewpoint and how decisions that are made on this dais or discussions that happen on this dais turns into visioning that settles across the entire system. And so for those reasons, I believe this board does a very good job, at least in their capacity of governance, for how setting the standards for this, reaching this and attaining this goal is achieved.
thank you, Dr. Cook. I saw all of cabinet like, no, Steve. So I actually think that one of the strongest things this board has done is, I always say we set policy, we set goals, we hire and monitor the superintendent, we set and we approve the budget. But that superintendent piece is huge, and I believe that we hired a superintendent that is a systems thinker. That was specifically part of our rubric, and who has come in and put systems in place over the last 2 years. So that falls under us. I didn't give us a 4, I gave us lower, but I'm always looking for improvement. And I do think the one place where we shift problems from one part of the system to the other, that when I observe it, is it's temporal, it's immediate. There's some crisis that has happened. People come to the board meeting and it's reactive. But if we can I'd like us to monitor that piece, because as soon as we start in some of those areas doing that reactive and shifting things, even though it feels like a small thing, it impacts the system as a whole. Okay, 10, innovation and creativity. We're going to do 1 minute each on these, because we're going to hand this puppy over. I put us as a 2 because I think, to Carrie's point, it's really hard as to do a ton of innovation as a part-time unpaid board member.
And yet, considering that, I think we are meeting these expectations.
And I guess I have a question. So this being from OSBA, none of the school board members in the state are paid, right? This is all.
Correct.
Volunteer positions, so it's under those parameters that every one of these standards exists. I guess I just want to point that out when we're reaching for, perfection, right?
When I look at innovation and creativity, I think about the space that this board has created. Like I said, as someone, kind of recent to this role, I wasn't surprised, but it was really nice to like see that there's a space to have dialogue and to thoughtfully consider other people's point of views, which kind of, I don't know, that kind of sounds elementary, but that's not always the case. Yeah, so I really was welcomed by that space there.
Conduct, ethics, relationships. Relationships specifically with the superintendent. I'm looking at the last year, we did have an ethics violation, and so I did put us as a 2.
I would add, one of the things that I sometimes struggle with is oftentimes one of you will ask questions about something, and it's can create some awkwardness because I try to live by the rule, if one of you knows something, then all of you know something. And so there's times when I shoot out information to all of you that one of you've asked for, and I wonder how that's often received. Sometimes it's whether or not it's understood that it's just, okay, I'm just looping that in, and sometimes you're getting information you didn't ask for.
Last one, budgeting and financial accountability. And I need some help with this, because seriously, this is one where we are really, really strong in our budgeting and our financial accountability as a district. We are conservative. We probably don't have a large enough reserve, but we have a solid reserve each year. We do a good job of making sure that we're on top of all of our financials. Our team does an excellent job reporting to us. And over again, I hear people saying, but I want to know a little bit more about the alignment. So I think this is actually one of our stronger areas as a district, with the exception of that transparency of alignment. And I'm not saying that we're not aligned, I'm just saying the transparency on the alignment.
We really don't need to review monthly financial statements. We depend on our staff to do that. And Leah brings us the quarterly reports and certainly gives us enough time to ask any questions that we have. So I agree with you. It's a strong suit.
Yeah, I was just gonna echo. I mean, it just feels like that team is very buttoned and tight, and we were talking about trust and relationships, and I totally agree that this seems like a huge strength of theirs.
Great. So here is my ask. We've gone through, we've thought about where we are, and what I would ask you to do is think about two things that are important to you for us to work on as a district. And I'm going to ask us to think about it in 2 lenses. One, what is something we do well, and how can we apply that to a goal that makes us even stronger? And then what's an area where we really need to grow? And what can we do to grow in that area? So how can we basically leverage an asset that we already have, either continuing in that area or applying that strength to another area? And then what's an area where we're just really, it's an area of growth for us and we need to do some work there. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. I am going to now hand it over to Superintendent Cook.
Thank you, Chair Barnes Delakia. If you all could go to the Ben Lapine Schools Board of Directors and Superintendent Operating Agreements, operating agreement, I'd like to frame this up a little bit and give you just some background. If you recall, we spent the better part of last year redesigning all the executive limitations. I'll back up one statement further even than that, and that is we function as a policy governance district. Policy governance is a clear delineation of the expectations, the role of the board, and how the board sets criteria and establishes the rules for how they're going to supervise their one employee, i.e. the superintendent. I think it was put into place in this district in 2015 or 16, if I'm not mistaken. And it's an aspirational leadership model. And I would tell you that long after all of us are gone here, I hope for the sake of this community that policy governance is maintained. Part of the policy governance model is setting executive limitations around the work of the superintendent in the kind of almost in the language of a double negative, thou shalt not fail to. And then clarifying what those expectations are. And if you recall, we spent a lot of time last year tidying those up so that they aligned explicitly with the goals of the district, a vision that this board has articulated so well. And so part of a follow-up to that was we had, I think the document was called Board Staff Linkage, which just the title of it on its own face value created a little bit of confusion. And so one of the next steps was let's remove that document, that board staff linkage, which is a very clear way of saying, and make it a very clear way of saying, what's the relationship between the board and their one employee, the superintendent? What is that relationship expected to be? And so what we've proposed for you is a draft document that essentially says, here is a kind of an agreement for the board and the superintendent to consider what are each of our respective roles. And so it has, first of all, the purpose of the agreement, and then it talks through what are our collaborative governance agreements, how do we work to communicate effectively, what's the role that the board aspires to, what's the role that the superintendent aspires to, and how do we meet the expectations of each side of that agreement. And so we took, we asked a lot of different folks how they frame this up. And this is our first shot at it. It's a draft for your consideration at some point in time. We believe that this should be formally adopted and signed, whether it's edited and changed, whatever, that this is an annual agreement that goes into part of our annual meeting in the summer and is clearly articulates and holds accountable the 8 folks that that work through the process together on how that agreement exists. And it's a foundational piece of the policy governance model and sets into work how all of those 12 expectations we just went through, how those can be worked through and in areas that are determined to be areas of celebration or areas of growth, how those expectations can be elevated to improve upon each one of those. And so I would set this before you as a starting point for you all to consider and to talk through and potentially send it back to us for either revision or potential adoption.
I'm not exactly sure how to ask this question, but can you describe either the differences, the similarities, or the relationship of your contract versus the operating agreements?
That's a very fair question. The contract essentially delineates the terms of my employment and the conditions, and there are several things that are called out specifically that are, I would say, on a most, I guess at the most basic level legally, could be terms that if people are out of bounds, that would be one thing that you could either say, Steve, you're in violation of your contract, or vice versa. What this is a general operating agreement that I would say, outside of a contract, sets a basic foundation for the way that we interact together. And so the contract is much more legalistic and much more legalistic.
And I believe in developing this, you looked at the OSBA example, and the OSBA example is also aligned to what we just looked at, which are the practices of effective boards. So you'll see some of the language from those practices in this agreement.
And a clarification around those expectations, when either side steps out of line, having something to point to and say, hey, this isn't in alignment, is like board members come and go, superintendents come and go. And this is a big $220 million machine. And it's important to know and understand what some of those expectations are. And without clear guidelines, it can be, I'm assuming, I've not been a board member, it can be a big, scary ride to jump on without clarity around what those expectations are. Like, I can tell you the one that the conversation I've probably had the most as a superintendent is that when a newly elected or newly appointed board member, the first time they go into schools, most of the time they're immediately treated differently than they were just as a community member, just because now they're a decision maker in the district. And what does that look like? Doesn't mean you shouldn't go into schools, far from the contrary. It's just how do you enter into those environments, and what is that presence? What is that impact? And so some of this is to help with onboarding, to help with guardrails, to help with making sure that it's clear what's a governance piece, what's an operational piece, just so that there are clear separations between those. And so having this as a part of the executive limitations, having this a part as a declaration that we're a Carver governance policy model district, I think is a true asset and a resource that we can have for ongoing conversations. And I apologize, I just want to add, I think the question isn't whether or not the document needs to exist. I think there's the fact that we had a document that existed. I think the question is whether or not we've articulated what those agreements should be effectively. If there are things that are missing, or if there are things that are called out here that shouldn't be called out or should be edited.
So if there are any suggestions as people look at it, now that you understand the purpose of it, and this is really, like Superintendent Cook said, we had the board superintendent, the staff linkage document, but it really wasn't an operating agreement. And so this is an attempt to bring that piece to life. And if you have suggestions as you see them, if you could share those suggestions with Superintendent Cook. And then we'll bring it back at the next session. Okay.
I really appreciate this document. I mean, to me, it reminds me of some sort of like a service level agreement, which is, pretty common. And again, as someone who is newish to this role, I think, one, it provides guidance. It also provides different aspects that maybe I hadn't even considered previously. So I really appreciate this document. Thank you.
Ditto. Actually, one question. What's the time frame? Are you looking for?
I think we would ask for any suggestions, feedback, or comments within the next couple of weeks.
Okay.
And then we would like to push this probably to the, what is this? September 12th? Yeah, so September 5th, September 1st. Yeah, if you could get us feedback by September 1st, that would be, we'd be very amenable to
Or
that.
if we have further questions?
Or
reach out
further
to you.
questions, yep.
Okay,
Glad to
thanks.
take those on. Okay, part two, that was part one of three for today. But part two is just, I want to share with you, we've had a lot of dialogue. This is about specifics towards the 4 board goals. And we've had a lot of dialogue about, number one, the fact that the goals are exactly what we need to be focusing on right now. They're very well done. They're right what we need for delivering on and approaching the needs of the district. But what has come out of the conversations in the last 8 months is we threw a lot of strategies at those goals last year. And the system feedback was, great stuff, Steve, way too much, way too much. And we listened to that and we've responded. And so part of what I want to share today, and it will be more formalized at a next meeting, or they'll be at the September meeting, are much tighter, much more coherent, and much reduced strategic initiatives that we're going to be addressing specifically on the 3 student outcome goals. And then I'll go into a little more detail on some of the goal 4 operational goals. I will tell you that, remember, we adopted as a group on about a year ago, maybe not quite a year ago, the measurements for all 3 of the student outcome goals. Those are formally adopted by you all. Those are not changing. Those will continue to be a part of what we report on. And quite frankly, we are absolutely open to the idea and conversation about if we want to add some benchmarks and or points of improvement to those, that would be a conversation for this board to have. And we're glad to have that discussion with you. So I want to read 2 of them to you for goal number 1, the instructional programming goal. And remember, we also aligned the EL to this. And so we're creating a document, we're in process of creating a document that has goal number 1, the executive limitation that aligns to goal number 1, the measures and the things we'll be monitoring that are a reflection of our performance on that goal. And then last but not least, what are the strategic initiatives that we'll be focusing on for the year that push us in that direction. And you will have, and we just mapped this out for the year. I think we got that finished this morning. Was that today? Yeah. You will either get a presentation here on the dais or a report on every single one of these in some fashion or another. So and it doesn't mean that's all we'll be presenting to you on reports in these board meetings, but we will be presenting those to you for each and every one of those goals. A couple of these goals are large, and so there'll be multiple reports for some of them. But let's talk just about the instructional program first of all. There's 2 bullets that we're drawing attention to this year, and remember, you'll get all of these, so you don't have to, take notes if you want, but you'll get all of this eventually. The 2 goals, the first one, all elementary classroom teachers, interventionists will continue to develop strong instructional practices in their use of really great reading curricular materials, which, if you recall, was our foundational reading skills material, as well as appropriate intervention strategies and materials. That doesn't mean that's all we're doing at the elementary school, but that is what is going to receive the lion's share of our attention and focus. Secondly, our staff at all 3 levels, elementary, middle, and high, will continue the development and implementation of priority standards, including the use of high leverage instructional practices and effective strategies for assessing student progress. And so if you take those two goals and take them back to our leadership launch, which was just a couple of weeks ago, what we're doing is clearing kind of the deck for our administrators and saying, this is what we need you to focus on. We have very clear and high expectations for those things so that we are reducing the amount of distractions that they can experience. Any questions before I move on to the other goals? Okay. The second one, if you recall, student success planning. This is the goal of students have a passion, a purpose, and a plan for their future that is measured overall and historically. We're disaggregating this out for our historically underserved students at the end of the year as well. And so our focus this year on this goal is at our secondary sites. We will begin implementation of the SchoolLinks College and Career Platform, which will help students plan for their future as well as build awareness of post-secondary pathways and how they connect to strengths and interests. This isn't the only thing we're doing on this one. And is Sean here? Sean, could you give just a little bit of detail? I'm catching him off guard, so let's see. Okay. I'd love for him to share just a little bit. This is a new program that we're putting into place this year, and so I just want to have him share just a little bit about that.
Yeah, I foresee a presentation on this later in the year with a little bit more depth, but I do. Do I need to talk louder? Is that better?
A little bit closer.
Okay, yeah. So where SchoolLinks comes out of is, as you recall, really for the last 18 months, we've had a team of folks looking at launching our life and career readiness curricula. And so what came out of that was two things. One is Wayfinder, which I believe we're speaking to.
I'll do it
Right.
next.
Okay, go ahead. You want? Okay.
No, go ahead.
Okay. One of those is Wayfinder, which is our K-12 implementation of social emotional learning. And as you recall, through that 18-month process, we developed a developmental pathway of progress through how this looks K-12. And so when we get to 9-12, we start really talking about college and career readiness. And so SchoolLinks is the operationalizing of the 9-12 program. And so it's a platform that's going to be mainly implemented by our school counselors. And in fact, on August 30th, they're all going to receive their initial training on how to do that. But it's a comprehensive platform where students will and counselors will be able to do everything related to college and career planning. So some of the features are there's career interest inventories that students will be doing. So they'll start narrowing down what their focuses are, which will then allow them to pick the right courses. And there's course planning software in there. And one of the unique features about it, and again, I'm going to learn as much about this as you are as it gets rolled out, but the counselors will have this, and they'll have student groups as like a dashboard, and they'll be able to see where their students are falling and then do career planning and course planning with students based on interests. Some other great features are teachers can submit recommendation letters through the dashboard. There's college exploration. This will eventually replace parchment, so we can send in transcripts through this platform. They can also apply for the college or for the Common App through this program, so you can apply for college through the app. So again, imagine you're a ninth grader and you start getting familiar with the platform so that by the time you're ready to, search into a career or go into college, you're very familiar with how to work with this. There's event schedulers. There's a one-stop shop for scholarships, so it can curate scholarship opportunities depending on your interests. And many, many more features, which we'd love to share with you once I think we have an opportunity to roll it out and start using it.
Stay put in case there's questions about Wayfinder too. Okay, any questions about that before we go to goal 3?
What are the counselors not going to be doing?
Well, actually, Shirley, this is, I think, going to be a real time saver and a real productivity maker for them, because counselors have been trying to do this within self-created systems that they're doing, and each school's doing it differently. And each student at each school is having a different experience with it. So what this is going to do is standardize that experience, create some efficiencies, and get everyone on the same page with what our program is and what we're doing. So, and counselors have been asking for this. And quite frankly, if you recall our Youth Truth data, kids have been asking for this too. So,
And I assume that the career counselors are also involved. I mean, we have counselors that do different things.
yes,
So,
yeah, exactly. We do have the college, or we have the college and career counselors at the schools, but we also have the school counselors. And when you think of the ASCA comprehensive school counseling model, this is a major body of work that our school counselors are wanting to be part of.
great. Sounds good.
So every counselor will be trained on this on the 30th?
Correct. Every high school counselor, yeah.
Okay, the second part of this, you might have heard us mention this. The other goal for part 2 is students at all 3 levels will begin implementation of the Wayfinder curriculum, which aims to increase belonging and purpose by improving relationships and connections at all levels. This is our K-12, essentially a K-12 social emotional learning curricular adoption. Because we aren't doing this in isolation, we're talking more about a whole child process. We're essentially integrating the college and career readiness and the social emotional learning into that integrated pathway that we've presented a couple of times. Remember that little roadmap that curves back and forth? We'll bring that back up when we give you some better detail on Wayfinder. Wayfinder is the adopted curriculum for that particular initiative as it relates. And since it's really has legs in both goal 2 and goal 3, this is a belonging goal, it's going to narrow even further some of our work. And so when we talk about the amount of things that we're going to be pushing onto the system as it relates to student outcome goals, it's much, much reduced this year because of that. And so I can answer a little bit of questions about Wayfinder. I think Sean can answer a little more. And if we would like to have more detail and more presentation, we probably need Jennifer and Stephen to
Yeah.
present on that.
Do you have any specific questions, or you want me to just riff a little bit about what Wayfinder is? Or let me, I'll just start with it. The implementation is going to be a little bit different at each level. So we'll start with high school. So when we think about life and career readiness at high school, think School Links. However, high schools will all have access to what's called the Wayfinder Activities Library, and it's a huge resource of different activities that teachers can do, anywhere from fun games to discussion prompts to protocols with how to solve problems that might be going on in the class. And so they're all getting training on that, and administrators have already gotten training on the activities bank. In K-8, it will be a little bit more robust in terms of specific lesson-based, curricula-based, sequence-based instruction that's going to happen with the Wayfinder curricula. And a nice thing about Wayfinder is because it expands K-12, the language and the way that it thinks about the topic progresses developmentally with the students. So they're going to become more and more familiar with it because it's linked all the way through K-12. And I would love for Jennifer to come speak about it because she's so much more eloquent about it, and I think she'll have an opportunity at some point in the year. But another unique feature about it is that the founder of Wayfinder lives here in Bend, Oregon. And so we have great access to a lot of coaching and a lot of support from the trainers that wrote the curriculum and how they developed it and what they did. So.
And I would add that we didn't just settle on a local vendor. This is nationally recognized curricula. And it just so happens that it was developed in our backyard.
I would guess that, I'm sorry, I don't know her full name, Amy, who works very closely with Jennifer, right? From the,
Amy Snyder, yes.
Yes. Would be another resource and support for our staff in any way, in any direction.
Amy, I believe, did participate on the group that vetted and went through and found both School Links and Wayfinder. Yeah, absolutely.
And I will say that Wayfinder and all of this work is really aligned with David Connolly's work. If you're not familiar, if you're familiar with his work, but yes, I was literally quoting Wayfinder for a paper and like Googled, and I'm like, oh, he lives in Bend, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, it was actually, it was implemented, we first heard about it was implemented down in the Bay Area, and then that's where we sort of started looking into it, so.
Really exciting.
Yeah, all brand new. We are right on the cusp of launching all this stuff, so more to come, for sure.
And thank you, Sean. And if you recall, there are questions specifically identified in the Youth Truth Questionnaire that speak to every one of these issues. And so we fully expect to see information on how that's going when students are taking that survey again in the late winter, early spring. Okay, for the last student outcome goal, this excites me to read. I have 2 bullets to read to you, and these are very, very clear. And you will hear alignment from conversations we've been having, from feedback with our task force work. Schools at all 3 levels will calibrate around a system of consistent behavior expectations and responses that are taught and reinforced explicitly across classrooms and schools. I'll take that just a little farther, not just proactively taught and clearly articulated what those expectations are, but then when there is some form of violation of those expectations, a common and coherent process for how those are being addressed and dispatched. And I will say this, I want to be on the record, that does not mean that we are no longer doing restorative practices. Making sure that we are continuing to promote and recognize that you can't punish your way out of any kind of behavioral expectations, that continues to be a point of how we want to address. And it aligns quite specifically, it aligns to the sense of belonging that we seek for every kid in our schools. So, and then the second one is actually, I think it's a school district as a system, a goal, but I think it's a goal that we all share, which is this idea of school and district staff working to prioritize student voice of staff, families, and community members using systems of coordinated advisory structures and groups. These voices will be collected to inform policy development, decision-making, strategic planning, and just elevating what I like to call a distributive leadership model, and elevating those closest to the work, and making sure that we are hearing from students and staff across the system, specifically, not just specifically, but explicitly making sure that we're making spaces for our students that are farthest from justice and have been historically not heard. And so we will continue to elevate that with a special emphasis, especially at the school level, of having adults and building administrators finding ways to elevate that voice right back to, as we were describing it earlier, not just satellite data, but making sure that we're collecting data of real-time experience. What's it like to be in our school? What works well in our schools? What's not working so well in our schools? I'm actually really excited about this. This is, like I said, this is all work that articulated out of the focus that we had last year on the training we did with Leading Equitable Schools out of University of Washington. And so keeping our vision tight on student outcomes, very tight when you consider we had more bullets in one category last year than I just gave you for all 3 student outcomes. That's, I think it's a really important delineation for us to make. We're going to capture all of that. We also, I don't know if you want me to go through them, but we've got some things we're monitoring in. We've picked 4 of the sub goals on 4 as well. We're going to monitor directly. We're going to monitor safety, communications, our continued emphasis on our, like what I would call, I guess, our hiring practices, our HR practices, and lastly, our finance practices. And so we've got those underway, and I'm actually looking really forward to the idea of getting this document completely tied up with declaring the strategic initiatives for those 4 additional as well, and getting this in your hands in September. So, any questions on any of that? And if you want me to go through those, I'm glad to. I just don't know if now's the right time.
I would love some thought partnership on something. So something I struggle with is, first of all, thank you. This is fabulous. I'm really excited. I literally reread Doug Reeves, one of Doug Reeves' books this summer, and was like, oh my gosh, I thought about all those bulleted strategic initiatives from last year, and I was like, nope, 1 to 2 pages. It's got to fit on 1 to 2 pages. So it's a really good reminder for me. So I really appreciate having this focus, and I think that that helps everybody in the system know exactly what we're working on. One of the challenges I always have is we've got goals, we've got a vision, we've got a strategic plan, and we're working on this strategic plan. And then we get data where something's on fire, and it's not in the strategic plan. And like, how do we handle that? And the specific example I'm thinking of is our LGBTQ plus youth in the Youth Truth data, which is 19% of our students. And so how do we, like, what do we do there? Like, I think about Cascade Middle School and how they do action research, and like they pick, so there's a school that's piloting something, and maybe there's, is there someone working on this at a smaller scale so that it would make it into the strategic initiative in the following year? But like balancing that big system, strategic vision with like, that is the most glaring piece of data I can think of. And then how do we balance that? Does it fit under the calibrating around consistent behaviors? Help me think about that.
Yeah, so I think the first step is leaving space for dessert. Like, I don't want to make light of anything, but part of what this intentional attack on these goals was, we will all be able to predict something's going to come up. And one of the things that is very important that we're already protecting is that we have not put so much on our plate that there is not going to be the ability to adjust. And what we heard last year was, not only was there no room for anything else, but what we were already giving to people were way too many courses. And so I would say the very first thing that we have is an intentionality that we're going to stay tight and we're going to stay clear on message so that we are not promoting and pushing too many things. That being said, we also have, like if you recall, I think it was last year, we decided we need to do something about, we painted over some artwork and we had to make some shifts midstream, and that took some time, and that took resource, and that took focus away from what we were currently working on. There will be something like that. I don't anticipate it's going to be us painting over walls again, but I anticipate there will be things pop up that we have to put some resource and time to. And what we're leaving right now is the ability for us to have a more responsive, coordinated approach when we do run into those kinds of issues. And you can't proactively run your way to a perfect functioning district. You're going to have some ability to react. And what we're doing is preparing for those and making sure that we have systems that have some space for that. We talk a lot with our safety department about trying to make sure that people are trained and prepared so that we're proactively anticipating, so that when some event does happen, that we go into a response mode that is coordinated and efficient. And that's the model that we would be taking on this. So I like when you ask, what's the thought partnership? I think the thought partnership, first of all, it would be wrong for us to say we anticipate certain things are not going to go well, because if that's true, we should be doing something about it proactively. But when it does go badly, or we do get some data that we are like, okay, part of our job is to be able to react and handle a situation and respond appropriately and with a good quality response. And I would tell you that out of all the things that happened last year, there are some we could put in the ledger of great response, and there's some that we could put in the ledger as not such a great response.
And I'd like to add just a little bit to that, Melissa. One of the things that we think about, when we think about these strategic initiatives, when we talk about standards of practice, for example, that's a floor, not a ceiling. So we're not shutting the door to innovative practices, coming out of an individual classroom or a school that it's like, we've got this, and now we're ready to try this as well. So I think that's important to remember. The second thing is, one of the things, and when I say our level leaders, I always want to include Kinsey and Sean, in addition to Lisa and Tammy and Juan and Katie. One of the things that they heard loud and clear from the principals last year is that one of the kinds of professional learning they value the most is when they can share ideas around problems of practice. And so trying to really create intentional protocols and times when elementary principals can, boy, this is coming up, we're really struggling with this. How do we get together? How do 5 of us come together in a building and do observations around a particular problem of practice that we're struggling with? Or Kinsey might, at a high school leadership meeting, hand out a scenario and let them, and frankly, they're usually real scenarios happening in our schools that then administrators can talk about and problem solve. So I think that they have heard loud and clear that that is of real value to create space and opportunity for those kinds of sharing. And they've already got, all of them have got now, you know, on their blogs, like Sharesies, where, hey, share your strategy for this. What's the system you're using for this? And trying to create that community of learners among the administrators.
That's great, Laura. And with our new principals, who have a lot to catch up with in terms of where we are in the district, that's really important. Do we have a mentor principal for all the new principals?
Yes, we have mentoring groups for all the new administrators, not just principals, administrators. They tend to not be one-on-one. They're small groups that work with each other. And in addition, for our not new to the district, but new administrators, we have 2 years, I work with them on essentially instructional coaching, you know, how to observe classrooms and provide useful feedback. So we have kind of the problem-solving mentoring, you know, the professional coaching and the instructional piece as part of that.
Thanks. I asked that question just because I don't know. I haven't seen how that all fits together. That's very helpful. Thank you.
I guess I'm still trying to think about this, because I don't think it's, I don't think it's an event and a response. I think it's a condition in our schools. And I think we have 2 years of data on our LGBTQ+. I'm also thinking like, no surprises in the boardroom, and this is kind of like a surprise, you know, it's feedback, but it's something I've been thinking about since we previewed this. And so I do think it's a condition. I also think that there are ways, I'm just riffing from my own practice, but like there's ways where people have a focus student that's from the LGBTQ+ experience, and they're doing the Wayfinder and they're doing the calibration through the lens of that student. I just think there's ways that we might, as a district, put a little bit more focus on the experience, because they're not gonna, a lot of those indicators that we're talking about, they're not gonna, it's how they're feeling. And so just trying to get to that piece where we've got that data for that very large subgroup of kids that are having a really hard time in our schools.
So this doesn't feel like a surprise in the boardroom, I'll tell you that. It's one of the reasons that we believe that our efforts to prioritize student voice and giving people spaces in which they feel like they can share their concerns and they feel like their identity is being recognized, even in a group in which it's one thing to say on a survey that I don't feel like I'm part of this community. It's a whole nother thing to be able to have dialogue with adults that can do something about that. And I think that's one of the reasons why we are intentionally getting this focus on making sure we're getting to the edges of our entire system and making sure that students that maybe don't have that don't resonate with the dominant culture, that don't have what they feel like are representatives telling their story, finding ways to get their story in a space where it can be heard by adults and acted upon by adults. And that is a real conversation we've been having for 15 months, whereas I think that's the difference, where a kid can say on a survey and can select on a Likert scale what their experience is like and give us feedback that it's not going well. But as a focus group, what do you need from us to improve that experience? That's hard to hide from, and that's a proactive situation that we need to be working on, and that's part of why we've called that out.
Thank you, that's helpful.
I don't mean to be repetitive here, but I'm thinking about the idea, the feedback that you've received, that's great stuff, but it's also way too much, right? And how to kind of tease through that, which is really important to acknowledge, and I appreciate you being upfront on that. And I also don't want to lose sight, and maybe this is a little piggybacking on Melissa's thoughts. I don't want to lose sight of the significant urgency in certain areas. And so even though it's way too much, how do we rein that in, or how does the district rein that in so we don't lose sight of that urgency that came about, that is very present? So, and I don't know how to do that, but I'm glad that that's on the table.
Yeah, I can tell you that what we clearly defined last year was we haven't even created safe spaces for people to be in community together that want to talk about these things. And so getting started, you can't just have this data and then say, now what? Like, let's just go seek out people that fit in these categories. And it doesn't work that way. We've got to create spaces. And that was our starting place. And so now we're not starting from scratch. And so we've got a beginning spot here. And how then to operationalize that in 33 schools is where we're talking about scale. We're talking about next steps. And it is foundationally about adults getting connected to kids. And it's right back to my statement earlier, away from satellite data. I'm not saying it's wrong, but it serves one particular purpose. The only way you can get this data is by real-time interaction with students that are willing to share that experience with you.
And then just to, on that urgency, on the calibration piece, I'm assuming it goes without saying that that some of that work will address the racial slurs that we've been experiencing in our schools.
Our goal of calibration is that, and it'll be a work in progress, is that every single child in Ben Lapine schools feels a sense of belonging and a sense of community in their schools, has adults that will vouch for them, and has adults that they can rely on, and have that feel like they're on their team. And so that work is a work in progress.
Thank you.
Oh, I was just thinking about how successful what's up? Yeah, I mean, the two things. So Alliance, which I think was launched last year. I mean, has there been thought to spend time on that in terms of the piece that I'm struggling with is that Alliance is a safe space for adults and youth, and also seems like a healthy place to explore what we're talking about. And then I also think about like what that experience is like when you do start asking some, tough questions, right? And but the other piece that I was thinking of is the annual town hall, which I think is December 1st December 1st this year. And is it possible to do something along those lines that focuses specifically on LGBTQIA+ Two-Spirit youth?
So we did one of these last year, if you recall. We did it in, what's the name of this field? Ford Field? Is that? No, Troy Field. I don't know where Ford Field came. Kinsey, what was that day called? What was the title? Do you remember? It was a full day. No, we hosted it in the district, but it was. Okay, GSA in the park, thank you. We had a GSA in the park experience for any kid that was interested in coming and creating events like that. And that was 2 weeks before school was out, I think, something roughly about that. Went over and participated and watched it for a little while. And for me, what I was looking for is, before we can ever get to solving problems, are we creating a spirit of community, and are we creating a place where people feel like they belong and they're valued? And it happened, and it was a success, and it was a start. And so that's the kind of things that happened last year that are creating the opportunity for change and the opportunity for dialogue of how we handle and address what kids are experiencing and what we do about that to give feedback so that the adults and the kids are talking about that. Another one I can think of is Mark Koopman invited me to was a GSA, a conflagration of all the maybe not all the GSAs, but I think 4 or 5 GSAs that was hosted at High Desert Middle School, like movie night. The day, what we called it, the Day of Silence, Night of Noise, is
Yeah.
that correct?
Yeah.
And creating another environment in which community is the focus point, and just having opportunities like that to get a place to create a sense of safety so that kids can then start sharing what it is that they're dealing with so that we can assist in those manners.
Yeah, and I don't want to belabor this, and so I know a lot of times we struggle with getting the word out, especially for events specifically for LGBTQ plus students, and I wonder if have we ever seen some sort of like backlash when something has been shared more widely? Yeah. Okay.
Do you mean like?
I think one of the challenges is that there unfortunately are people in society that, when things are published widely, choose to do things like roll call past children's events, which is really unfortunate that there's adults that act that way, but they are, and they do.
On that, but there is room to increase those opportunities. And it's sometimes very much school dependent on which counselors or which GSA lead are connected, and lead time and that sort of thing. And there's a lot of room for improvement and keeping kids safe.
Absolutely.
Right? So I
And
really love that we're on that.
And
Yeah.
we participated. We had a booth at the Pride event this summer, and that's a presence. That's a new presence for Benla Pine Schools. And so creating a dynamic in which kids are seeing us model behavior, part of trust and inspired leadership, one of the things that is an expectation is that the leaders are expected to go first, like lead from a place of example. And so that's a lot of communication that we're pushing out this year. And so I would fully expect, with the work that we're focusing on to elevate and give students opportunities to share their truths, are going to continue to develop this across the next few years as part of our strategic planning. It's great. Part 3 is only going to take about an hour and a half. Okay, so no, I'm teasing, of course. Part 3 of this conversation is, and I want to preface this with going back and touching on 2 points that we've talked about at different times in the last month to 6 months. And the first one is elevating the work of the task force. I think I'm not sure if it's in September or October, but we've got a scheduled time for task force members to come and talk with you about the work that's transpired. I think we've had 7 meetings, something like that, maybe 8 meetings with that group. And the first goal on goal 2 of making sure that, or excuse me, goal 3, making sure that we have a common set of understandings with regarding to how we handle student behaviors is actually directly from the task force. That is work that the task force promoted and said is our single largest priority for the task force to submit. And I want to call out specifically the efforts of the task force to get from a list that was pretty extensive into what is your single most important priority if we want to start the year off correctly. We can't, it's taking the same model that we can't focus on everything. If everything's a 10, nothing's a 10. So what is it? And so this was what their request was, an agreement, and we all came together around a common language in setting this priority. However, there was a lot of other conversations that are worthy of follow-up. Many of those things fit into a model of things that we would say could become strategic priorities in a system in which we have a 3 to 5 year plan and additional revenue. And so I want to set the stage with the first piece, which is these are items that this particular group of about 35 to 40 people have said is something that we need further discussion on. Things like, here, I'll just go ahead and read you a few of them. Reduction in class sizes, specifically in some of our highest need elementary schools. Making sure we have mental health resources and counseling resources at every single one of our schools. Working on dialing in what culture and climate work would look like at each of our schools so that students, staff, and family safety, welcoming, and sense of belonging are elevated to the highest level they could be, which is in exact alignment with our third goal. And then potentially a connection to maybe district-run therapeutic placement services. Right now, the amount of therapeutic services in Central Oregon are extremely limited. What would that look like if we were going to, for example, sponsor something like that? Just those kinds of issues, those are just a few of the things that were identified as a possible priority. All of those things take resources. And so part of the next step would be, we're already doing some investigating, and you will have Scott Mabin and maybe some other members of our team in front of you at the September work session, talking about what it would look like to consider a local levy and what we would have to ask of our community and what those community expectations might look like. What are the financial parameters of what that might look like? What would additional taxes on our community generate as far as a $220 million annual budget? What would that purchase, if you will? And then the question of whether or not there's alignment between these two things. And I would tell you that task force work is paramount and important, but it's also not the entire picture. We would have to, in my opinion, if we're going to do this the right way, we would have to go out and do some work with our community and say, what is it that your expectations are for our school system? And ask our students similarly, what are the things that we would want to have happen in the next 3, 5, 7 years that would, in my opinion, need to be in place if we were going to ask our voters to consider what they would be investing in. You know, it's not just what Steve thinks or what Dr. Nordquist thinks or what our staff thinks. It's what this community wants for the direction for all of our children. And at this point, we don't have that feedback. And so we would need to actively go get that feedback. Oh, I think Carrie might have turned on her mic. And so part of what we would suggest is that kind of third aspect of this, or this third leg. We've got what we believe is a really great focus for this year, but it's also time for us to start talking about explicit guidance on what we want to have happen in the next 3 to 5 years. and how we would use resources if the community, if we decide we're ready to go ask this community for it, they're going to want to know explicitly what we intend to spend that on. And so spending some time in the next however long it takes to get that feedback and to start asking those questions of our community, and then set that up on a list next to the task force request and just say, okay, these are big calls. What do we want to do about it? Glad to take questions in that.
Director McPherson Douglas, were you trying to say something?
That was not me. I'm not sure what it is, but thank you.
Okay. All righty, no questions. Okay. Then, we've got a lot of work going on. Then we will move into board comments, and we will start with Director McPherson Douglas.
Nothing from me tonight. Thank you for all of the hard work and conversation tonight. Appreciate it.
And then we'll go to Director Olson and on down.
Just a quick comment. The Education Foundation is one of the beneficiaries of the Great Duck Race. So we sold duck race tickets at the Ghost Tree Golf Tournament Friday. It was very fun, and I will tell you, we had, how do I say this? We had something like 30 booklets of tickets to sell, and by 2 o'clock, we had something like 4 left. And those booklets are 30 tickets each. So it was really productive, and that is money directly for our classroom grants that the Education Foundation delivers to our staff upon their request.
No comment.
I just wanted to share, I think it was last week, the City Club had a forum on student behavior, and just wanted to give a shout out to the 3 presenters there. Eric Powell was one of them. Lucy Ferguson, no. Anyways, it was, yeah, it was, yes, and it was, yes, Little Deer Evans, and it was phenomenal, and I hope that what they shared can be implemented in some way, and if there's a recording of it, I highly encourage anyone to watch it, because it was just such a great message that's tangible, minus like resources and stuff. But so anyways, yeah, that was great.
Thank you. A few things I've done since we met last. First, I attended the new administrators launch and then the all administrator launch. Thank you so much for the invitations to do so. I also participated in my monthly board chair cafe. Not a whole lot new from that to share with you, but the policy updates, I did want to say that we are going to need to be doing training now. That came out after there was a couple of bad players. And so boards will be required to complete some type of training. They're still working on exactly what that will look like. My hope is that that what we already do will count for that training, but we'll see. And then the other one was, again, that stipend piece that we will bring at our actual September meeting. Other than that, I just want to really appreciate Superintendent Cook and Deputy Superintendent Nordquist for all of the thoughtful work that has gone in to getting those leadership launches ready, and their entire teams, the entire cabinet. It's been very inspirational. The energy in the room is clearly there, and I have every confidence that we are going to have an amazing year because the groundwork has been put in place. So thank you. With that said, our next regular school board business meeting is scheduled for September 12th, 2023.